and welcome to Narayana IS Academy. I'm Yogesh Kottavar and I'll be taking up the daily news analysis of The Hindu and Indian Express. We'll discuss 5 most important articles from these two newspapers in a comprehensive manner. The first article mentioned on page number 19 of Indian Express. It talks about SSLV, that is Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. Recently ISRO has completed its third developmental flight of SSLV. So we'll understand what is a launch vehicle, what all launch vehicles India have, and what is this SSLV, how it becomes very special. The next article mentioned on page number 12 of Indian Express. It talks about right to education. In recent times, we have observed that state governments are trying to undermine right to education. So we'll understand the legal and constitutional provisions related to these rights in a comprehensive manner. The third article mentioned on page number 8 of The Hindu. It talks about monkeypox. Recently, World Health Organization has declared monkeypox as public health emergency of international concern. So we need to study what is this mpox, how it is caused, and do we have any vaccine available for this. The next article mentioned on page number 5 of Indian Express. It talks about Public Accounts Committee. Recently, Congress leader Mr. Venugopal has been appointed as the chairperson of Public Accounts Committee. So we'll understand what is Public Accounts Committee and how a Congress leader or an opposition leader becomes the chairperson of this committee. The next article mentioned on page number 8 of The Hindu. It talks about inflation problem in India. The article tries to convey a message that the problem of inflation in India lies in the problem of food inflation. So we will understand this article and analyze it in a detailed manner. After this, we'll also discuss some practice questions so that you will have a good idea about what kind of questions can be expected in the examination from these articles. So let's get started. The first article is about Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, in short SSLV. And this article becomes very important from exam perspective. We need to know what is SSLV, we need to know what is launch vehicle, and what launch vehicles India already has. Now here from the syllabus perspective, GS paper 3 mentions about awareness in the fields of space. So the topic becomes very important. Now look at this previous year question. It says, India has achieved remarkable successes in unmanned space missions, including Chandrayaan and Mars Orbiter mission, but has not ventured into manned space mission. What are the main obstacles to launching a manned space mission, both in terms of technology and logistics? Examine critically. So to answer such questions, you need to have a comprehensive idea about ISRO's missions. Okay. Now moving on to the article. Recently, ISRO has launched SSLV and it was its developmental flight number 3. See, there are two types of flights. One is developmental flight, another is operational flight. What is the difference? If you are developing something, if scientists are developing, engineers are working, in that case, if you are sending something into space, that is called developmental flight, because that thing, that launch vehicle is in the developmental stage. It has not yet developed completely. But when it is completely developed, in that case, if you're using it, it is called operationalization. So that will be operational flight. So right now, SSLV is in the developmental stage. Now this launch took place from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, which is located in the Andhra Pradesh. Now first of all, what is launch vehicle? Now launch vehicle, we can consider it as just a vehicle. Just like we have bus, we have car, we have bike. Similarly, there is a vehicle which is used to send something from the surface of the earth to the space. That something could be your satellite, it could be a spacecraft, it could be a scientific instrument, or even a human being. Then if you want to send that person, you need a vehicle, and that vehicle is launch vehicle. In simple terms, we also call it a rocket or a carrier rocket. Now what this launch vehicle usually does is that if you want to send something from the surface of the earth, then you need thrust. Thrust is like a push you are giving against the earth. For example, there is gravity which is acting on this launch vehicle. So gravity will want that it should not go. But this thrust which will be produced in this launch vehicle, it will put this particular launch vehicle in the space. Now here we will have a very strong propulsion system. Propulsion means it will actually propel. Propel means it will move the thing, it will push the thing. So propulsion system will include some kind of engine, some kind of fuel. So just like any other vehicle, just in your bike you have IC engine, you have the fuel in the form of petrol. Similarly, in the propulsion system of the launch vehicles, there are multiple engines and multiple kinds of fuels. The fuel could be in a liquid form just like petrol, or it could be in a solid form also. Such is the case of any launch vehicle. Now, these launch vehicles are constructed in different stages. So you can see this is a rocket or a launch vehicle. Now it is constructed in multiple stages. So for example, this is stage 1, this is stage 2, this is stage 3. And the satellite that we have built, that satellite has been put over here. Okay. Now what happens is that when you are sending this satellite, first there will be this engine number 1 which is working in this stage 1. There will be fuel over here and this fuel will start burning. This engine will work and there will be thrust generated and this launch vehicle will move ahead. After some time, this fuel will be completely exhausted, completely burnt. After which the stage 1 falls back on the earth and only this part of the rocket will move ahead. Now after some time, the engine in the second stage will be working, the fuel will be exhausted from the second one. So this part of the rocket will again fall back on the earth. Similar is the case with the third one. Now this is falling back, this will help us in reducing the weight and from this we can actually increase the efficiency of this transportation process. Now moving ahead, if you look at the launch vehicles that India has, it includes multiple launch vehicles. India started building its first launch vehicle in the form of SLV, that is Satellite Launch Vehicle. We used it for the first time in the year 1980, wherein we launched Rohini satellites. Now this launch vehicle SLV has a payload capacity. When we say payload capacity, that means the weight it can carry, how much weight of a satellite it can carry with itself. That is its capacity. Now this capacity was very much limited. So after some years, we developed SLV in a new form and named it ASLV. That is Augmented Satellite Launch Vehicle. It had payload capacity higher than the SLV. Now after some time, ISRO developed a new launch vehicle named as PSLV, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. And this launch vehicle is considered to be one of the most reliable and most successful launch vehicle of ISRO. We call it ISRO's workhorse. Why do we call it workhorse? Because in total, it has completed 57 successful flights and only 3 failures. That means it is considered to be very reliable. If you look at its capacity, it can transfer around 1000 to 1750 kg of weight to the low Earth orbit and 1425 kg to the geostationary transfer orbit. Now what are these orbits? You see, if you are moving ahead from the Earth's surface, if you go in the nearby region, this region is low Earth orbit. If you go beyond that and you are taking the journey ahead up to the distance of somewhere around 38,000 kilometers, in that case we are saying this is geostationary Earth orbit. And to transfer a satellite from here to here, we need this PSLV. Okay, and it can transfer only 1425 kg of the payload in this particular orbit. Now, if you look at the Chandrayaan-1 mission, Mars orbiter mission, which we call as Mangalyaan, these were taken place with the help of PSLV. Okay. Now, moving ahead, ISRO also developed a new launch vehicle named GSLV, that is Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle. Now, it is having a capacity to send heavier payloads even to this geosynchronous Earth orbit. So it can send somewhere around 2500 kg of payload to this geostationary Earth orbit. After that, ISRO made some advancements in this GSLV and made this GSLV Mark III. This rocket is considered to be India's heaviest rocket. We call it sometimes Bahubali rocket of ISRO. And it can send somewhere around 4000 kgs of payload in the geosynchronous orbit. Now, moving ahead, what is small satellite launch vehicle. Now here, earlier when we were sending something through PSLV or GSLV, so this is the rocket and here we were putting the satellites, and usually ISRO used to send multiple satellites. So somewhere around 50 to 60 to 70 satellites ISRO used to send in one go. Now here, if you go to ISRO and say that I have one satellite which is very small, can you send this? ISRO used to say you have to wait. You have to wait till our PSLV gets completed with its multiple satellites. So there was no on-demand facility available in India. So now ISRO is developing a small satellite launch vehicle. That means the launch vehicle itself is very small and it can be sent using only one satellite. So here the focus is on sending smaller satellites, that too on demand. If someone comes to you on demand, you can build a satellite launch vehicle and send it. So this will have a capacity of a very lighter or a smaller payloads. So you can hardly send up to 500 kgs of payloads, but you can build it very early. So you can see here you will have a 3-stage propulsion system. So just like we had PSLV, GSLV, here also we have 3 different stages, stage 1, 2, 3. And the fuel that we are using, it's a solid fuel. Now there's a saying that solid fuel is considered to be better than liquid fuel. Why? Because it is very easy to handle, and also if you burn the solid fuel, it gets burned in the single go. In case of liquid fuels, you can stop the mechanism of burning. This will not happen in case of solid fuel, so it is considered to be better to use. Second thing, this SSLV has velocity trimming module. So velocity trimming module is similar to what we use in case of our bikes. If you are parking a bike, in that case you try to be very precise. So you will try to put the bike in such a manner that the speed is reduced and there will be a specific trajectory that you will follow. Similarly, you can put a particular satellite in a precise location or in a precise orbit. That you can do through this velocity trimming module. So you can control the speed and the trajectory of that satellite. Moving ahead, you are reducing the turnaround time of this satellite building. Earlier, when we were developing any launch vehicles, in that case, we required at least 70 days. And you required at least 60 people to work on this particular project. But now if you're developing a SSLV, in that case, you hardly require 72 hours and you hardly require 6 people to work on this project. So the turnaround time is reduced. Secondly, the infrastructure requirement will be very less. At the ground level, you don't need much infrastructure as such, and it is considered to be very cost effective. So the cost of the project is reduced. When you reduce the cost, many players will come into play. Many people, many organizations from the national as well as international floor will come to ISRO and say that please send our satellite into space. So it's a good opportunity for ISRO now. Now, if you look at the significance, first of all, ISRO can now commercialize the market. Herein, the demand for small satellite launches is very high currently, and ISRO can ensure that we meet this demand. Secondly, there is a strategic impact. See, in case you do not have the capability to send satellites earlier, or you don't have the capacity to send satellites altogether, then you are dependent on other country. So when you are dependent, that means you do not have any strategic autonomy. But when a country becomes independent, the country can ensure that we will send any satellite to space at any point of time, whether it is related to defense, communication, or any scientific purpose. Then it increases the accessibility to space. Look at this thing. Now there will be an engineering college where students can build a satellite, a small satellite, and they may reach out to ISRO saying that through your SSLV, please send our satellite to space. That means what we have done is that the space sector, which was earlier controlled only by the elites, now will be available to any other person who is not even having the immense amount of money which was earlier required. So we are actually democratizing the space access. When you democratize, it will lead to more innovation and development of new space technologies, which is a good thing for us. And we also talked about this on-demand launch service which will be available for anyone. The next article is about right to education. In recent times, we have observed that many state governments are trying to undermine right to education. So we'll understand what is this right and what is Right to Education Act. This topic becomes important from prelims as well as mains perspective, because in mains GS paper 2 mentions about issues relating to development and management of social sector, which includes education. Now you can see this previous year question. It says the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 remains inadequate in promoting incentive-based systems for children's education without generating awareness about the importance of schooling. Analyze, and this has been asked for 15 marks. Now look at this article. It says that in the year 2009, this RTE, Right to Education Act, was passed by Parliament. The act said that we are going to provide universal access to education to the children who are under the age of 14 years. That is from 6 to 14 years. We said that we'll provide you education free of cost. And here the role of state government is very important. We are observing a trend that state governments are trying to undermine the provisions of this Right to Education Act. They are trying to provide some kind of exemption to the private sector schools, private schools, and this is causing a concern. Now, first of all, what is right to education? Now, just like we have so many fundamental rights, we are talking about right to education as a fundamental human right. When we say it is a fundamental right, we are saying that without this right, a human being cannot lead his or her life in a good manner. Just like we have right to life. Without this right, you cannot live. So right to education is very important for any children. So if you get free and compulsory education, only then you can go for individual empowerment and societal development. Now, if you look at the constitutional provisions related to this right to education, which existed in the original Constitution of India. So you can see the section of DPSP, that is Directive Principles of State Policy. And you can see this Article 45. It used to mention that state shall endeavor to provide free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14 years. So this was original text mentioned in this. The next, article number 39, clause F. It used to say state should ensure that children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity. So through this, I am trying to tell you that this DPSP section clearly provided for right to education. But there is a problem. Whenever something is mentioned in DPSP, that means state should do that, but it is not mandatory. You cannot go to Supreme Court and say that I have not got this right. My right has been violated. You cannot say that. So we are talking about making it fundamental right instead of putting it in DPSP. So we saw that in the year 2002, the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government passed 86th constitutional amendment. And this amendment transferred this right from DPSP to the fundamental rights section. So Article 21A, this was added in the Constitution. So now this act, this particular amendment made it a fundamental right. So you can reach out to Supreme Court saying that if the right is violated, the state will have to show its responsibility or accountability. Now moving ahead, even if you bring something in the Constitution, that does not mean it will happen in reality. You need to bring a law for that in the Parliament. So in the year 2009, Right to Education Act was passed by the Parliament. Now if you look at the key provisions of this act, it says that there will be free and compulsory education for the children who belong to the age group of 6 to 14 years. And they can take education from the nearby school in whichever area they live. If there is a school, that school could be government school and that could be even a private school. The children can reach out to that school and get the free admission or free education. Second thing, there was a criteria of 25% reservation in private schools. Usually private schools, if you do not pay them the fees they are charging, they will not give you admission. But government said that we will put 25% reservation quota even in these private schools which do not get any funding from the government. And this reservation is made for economically weaker sections and disadvantaged groups. Also, it said that there should be a basic school infrastructure and there should be some norms related to teachers For example, some standard was set up related to teachers' qualifications or teacher training, etc. It said that there will be prohibition on certain practices. For example, you cannot physically punish the children. You cannot harass the children mentally. You cannot take capitation fees, or there cannot be any screening procedure for admission. Usually we see that in private schools, they go for screening procedure. Just like an interview, they will take your interview before admission. So this has been scrapped. Then this act mentions about no detention policy. Earlier it was being said that till the class 8th, the children should not be detained anyway. So the student will, even if he is not getting good marks, he will not be detained. But after some years, it was being seen that this policy is not working. So in the year 2019, government amended the provisions and said that we will leave this to the states to decide whether they want to bring no detention policy or not. After that, there is this non-admitted children provision. It says that if there is a child who could not take education, who has been a dropout and now wants to take education, in that case, government will have to provide it. And government will have to put that child in the age appropriate class. So for example, the child is of the age 10, then he should be put in the class where the same age group is there. Then there should be child-friendly learning. So the environment should be free from any kind of fear, trauma or anxiety. So such was the thing mentioned in the Right to Education Act of 2009. But we said that there are some challenges. The state governments are creating some kind of hurdles. We've seen that this provision of 25% reservation in the private schools, this has been diluted by many state governments. For example, if you look at the government of Maharashtra, who recently said that through a resolution, through a law, they said that if there is a government school in your vicinity of 1 kilometer, in that case, you have to go to that government school. You cannot reach out to this private school. Means this private school will not have the obligation of ensuring 25% reservation for this economically weaker section or disadvantaged group. Now, after this matter reached to the Bombay High Court, and Bombay High Court criticized this action of Maharashtra government and said that there should be strict enforcement of right to education. Now here, there are some other issues also. For example, there is no teacher training which is taking place in a qualitative manner. Also, there are no inclusive classrooms which ensure that these children of economically weaker sections are part of it. Then there were amendments brought in. For example, this no detention policy was amended. But see, the fundamental challenge still remains. It's been more than 10 years this act was brought in, but we still lack the implementational possibilities, or the potential of this act is not yet realized in reality. So, as a solution, as a way forward, we can say that first of all, we need to strictly enforce Right to Education Act. We need to have a monitoring mechanism. We need to ensure accountability of the government. And here, the role of judiciary can become very important. Just like in this case, Bombay High Court took a stand, the judiciary can take stand again and again. Then we can focus on teacher training, wherein the qualitative training angle should be focused. Then the classrooms should be made inclusive. There should be cultural sensitivity in the classrooms. And at the policy level, we can do one thing. We can expand the scope of right to education. We said that we are bringing the right to education only for the age group of 16 to 40. But we can even increase it, and more younger and older children can be brought under this act. Then we can bring the role of parents and even the society, the community, and even this school management committee. This we can bring in. And lastly, we can focus on the quality education and not just the quantity part. The next article is about monkeypox, in short, Mpox. Recently, World Health Organization has declared monkeypox as public health emergency of international concern. And Africa is struggling to get vaccines for this Mpox viral disease. So for us, it is very important to understand how this Mpox is caused. Is there any bacteria or virus or fungi behind this particular disease? And from syllabus perspective, in prelims, general science questions can focus on such diseases. If you look at this previous year question of 2013, it says which of the following diseases can be transmitted from one person to another through tattooing? Is it chikungunya, hepatitis B, HIV AIDS? So to answer these questions, you should have factual understanding. Okay. So let's move on to the article. We said that Africa is struggling to get the vaccines. That means for the Mpox, the vaccines are already available, but they are not available in Africa. If you go to USA or European countries, you will see that the vaccines are available more in number. But if you go to Africa, the vaccines will be lesser in number. So this is the problem Africa is facing at this moment. Now, what is this monkeypox? It's a viral zoonotic disease. First of all, it is a viral disease. It is caused by a virus, and the name of that virus is monkeypox. See, such diseases can be caused by virus, bacteria, parasite, fungi, anything. Here we are specifically saying it's a virus. And it is a zoonotic disease. When we say a disease is a zoonotic disease, that means it first started from an animal and then it has got transmitted to a human being. So for example, this disease, this first started with a monkey. So this virus first attacked the monkey got infected, and because a human being got in touch with this monkey, he also got the same disease. And such diseases are called zoonotic diseases. Now it is not necessary that only viral diseases will be zoonotic. The disease could be caused by bacteria, parasite or fungi, anything. Now here, this particular disease was first identified in monkeys in the year 1958, and later on in the human beings, it was recorded in the year 1970 in Democratic Republic of Congo. Now there are two variants or two different types of monkeypox. First is clade 1, which is having its origin in Central Africa, and there is clade 2, which is having its origin in the western part of Africa. So you can say this particular disease has its origin in the African region only. Now moving ahead, what are the symptoms from this Mpox? First, you will generate rashes on your skin, then there will be fever or any other symptoms which are very similar to flu. So you will have back pain, headache, muscle ache, you will feel that you have very low energy, etc. Now in case this particular Mpox is being infected to an animal, I am saying it will be transmitted to a human being, and this transmission takes place in different forms. One could be direct form, that you have come into contact with that animal in a direct way. So there could be skin to skin contact or contact with respiratory secretions of that animal. Also there could be indirect contact. So for example, you put a towel on an animal and then you use that towel. In that case also you may get this disease. Then once a human being is infected, he can infect another human being too. So there is a possibility of sexual transmission of this Mpox virus, and this is seen in the sex workers of Democratic Republic of Congo. Now if you look at the treatment of this Mpox disease, at this moment we do not have any specific treatment as such. Only vaccines are available, or you can go for early and supportive care. The next article is about Public Accounts Committee. Recently, Congress leader K.C. Venugopal has been appointed as the chairperson of Public Accounts Committee. So we need to study what is Public Accounts Committee. If you look at the syllabus, in prelims this can be asked, and in mains GS paper 2, Parliament, its structure, its functioning, its conduct of business has been mentioned very clearly. Now we can look at this previous year question. It says, which one of the following is the largest committee of the Parliament? Committee on Public Accounts, Committee on Estimates, Committee on Public Undertakings, Committee on Petitions. So you can expect factual questions from such topics. Now moving ahead, what is the context? This Congress MP K.C. Venugopal, he has been appointed as the chairperson of PAC. This PAC, Public Accounts Committee, it's a very important committee from Parliament which plays a key role in ensuring financial accountability of the government of that time. Now here if you look at it, this committee was earlier established in the year 1921, that is in the British era. So you must have read about Government of India Act 1919, also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reform. In this reform, we saw first time PAC was formed. After that, when India got its independence, we in the Lok Sabha brought this rule of bringing PAC. Now, when you look at the appointment process of this chairperson of PAC, this chairperson is appointed by the Speaker of the House. And usually, in a traditional manner, the chairperson comes from the opposition parties. There's no rule, but this is a tradition. Why the person comes from opposition? Because we want to ensure the accountability of the government. And if a member from the government will be part of it, how can you ensure accountability? Now here, there are total 22 members, out of which 15 members come from the Lok Sabha and 7 members come from the Rajya Sabha. Each member will have the term of complete 1 year. And you look at this important fact that in the entire Public Accounts Committee, there is no minister. So any minister who is part of government will not be part of PAC. Here the purpose of this PAC is to ensure that if there is any fund, any amount of money which is being used by the government, the PAC will check whether government has used the amount for the same purpose or not, or is there any fraudulent activity going on. Here we are saying that the appropriation accounts are examined by the PAC. So when we say appropriation, the appropriation bill is passed in the parliament, and then only the government can actually spend the amount. So we say that Parliament has the complete authority over the budget. And here that's why we need Public Accounts Committee to scrutinize whether the budget has been used in the rightful manner or not. So the next article is about the problem of inflation in India. We need to study what is inflation and what is inflation targeting, which is done by Reserve Bank of India. If you look at the syllabus, GS paper 3 mentions about Indian economy. And you need to study about the macroeconomic angle wherein the issue of inflation becomes very important. Now, if you look at the previous year question of 2011, it says India has experienced persistent and high food inflation in the recent past. What could be the reasons? First, due to a gradual switch over to the cultivation of commercial crops, the area under the cultivation of food grains has steadily decreased in the last 5 years by about 30%. Second, as a consequence of increasing incomes, the consumption patterns of the people have undergone a significant change. And third, the food supply chain has structural constraints. Now, to answer any such question, you should have a good conceptual clarity on the issue of inflation. Okay? So let's move ahead with the article. What is the context? Now, recently, Economic Survey has given some suggestions to the Reserve Bank of India in regard to the inflation targeting. But before understanding inflation targeting, first understand what is inflation. See, in India or any other country, if the price of goods and services are increasing, we call it inflation. So, for example, if there is some vegetable, for example, there is potato, the price of potato is rupees 10 today. But after some time, maybe after 2-3 days, the price becomes rupees 50. In that case, we are saying there is inflation in the potato. So, rising of price is termed as inflation. Now, what happens is that in a country, we usually try to understand what is the rate of inflation so that we can come up with some policy measures to ensure that the market remains stable. Now, here comes the role of Reserve Bank of India. RBI has been given this task of ensuring the inflation between the range of 2 to 6%. If inflation goes below 2% or above 6%, then RBI is responsible. Government may ask questions to RBI. Now, this task of RBI is known as inflation targeting. So, this is the task of RBI. Now, if RBI is doing this task, here Economic Survey is saying that RBI should now focus on core inflation instead of headline inflation. So, what is this core or headline inflation? So, inflation is measured in two different ways. If you go to developed countries will usually go for core inflation. And if you look at any developing country like India or Bangladesh or Pakistan, in that case, these countries go for headline inflation. And what is the difference? Here in the headline inflation, the food prices as well as energy prices are also included. When you calculate inflation, you take a basket of goods. There will be so many goods you will consider, and in that basket you will also consider food, energy, etc. Now, why we are talking about food and energy specifically? Because in India or any other developing country, the price of food or energy matters to people a lot, and the price of these products are very much volatile. So for example, due to some rainfall issues, we observe sudden rise of price in the onion or in the potato or tomato. So this sudden price rise is very normal in India. Then in case of any kind of geopolitical conflict, for example, the Israel-Hamas conflict is going on. In case the entire Gulf region gets into this war, there is a chance that the price of crude oil will suddenly increase, right? So I'm saying food and energy prices are already very much volatile. And if you look at the developing countries, the people living in the developing countries, whatever amount they earn, most of it goes in the food and energy part. For example, a person is earning 50,000, then he's spending somewhere around 20 to 25k on the food and energy part only. Whereas if you look at the developed countries, the people earn more amount. So their earning will be somewhere around 2 lakhs. Now, if you look at this, here they will be spending somewhere around 20 to 25k. But if you look at the percentage, here Indian individual is spending somewhere around 50% of his income on food and energy sources. Whereas this person from developed country, he is spending at max 10 to 15% of his income on food and energy. So what I'm trying to say is that the food price or energy price matters to developing countries a lot, whereas this will not be the case for the developed countries. Now, here, whenever inflation is calculated in a developed country, they will not consider food or energy price, and such inflation is termed as core inflation. Whereas when you consider food and energy, then it will be termed as headline inflation. Moving ahead. Now, RBI is being told that you should go for core inflation instead of headline inflation. That means you should not consider food prices and the energy prices. Now, there is a problem in case you do not include the food prices. First, how are you going to justify this matter? Because food section becomes around 50% of the income expenditure for Indian individuals. So how can you remove this part? Second, there will be impact on the households. If you do not even count the inflation of food, in that case you will say that there is no inflation in India. But in reality, there will be inflation, and that will impact the households. Now, if you do not have any specific strategy to manage food inflation and you are removing it from the inflation calculations, in that case, this can be a failed strategy. And lastly, if you are planning to provide some extra amount to the individuals, for example, because there is inflation of 2% in the food prices, you say that we will provide you some subsidy or we will provide you some income transfer. In that case, you will need budget, and the budget will have some resource constraints. So you will not have enough budget to provide so much amount to the people. So we are saying this strategy could be very much challenging to implement. Now we'll discuss some of the practice questions. Question number 1. Which of the following statements about the Public Accounts Committee is or are correct? Number 1. The PAC was first established in 1921 following the Government of India Act 1919. Absolutely correct. Second, the PAC is chaired by a member of the ruling party in Lok Sabha. Now this is absolutely wrong, because we said that it is traditionally led by a person from the opposition. So second is wrong. So if you go to the options, if second is wrong, only B is the right option. Without reading even the third option, we can say this is the answer. Okay. Next, question number 2. Consider the following diseases: Mpox, rabies, dengue, chikungunya. How many of the above diseases are zoonotic diseases? Now, to answer this question, you should have factual clarity on all of these diseases. We have read about Mpox, but we did not read about these. So if you don't know, you cannot answer such question. Here the answer is all the four because all four are actually zoonotic diseases. Okay. Now moving forward, consider the following statements regarding the transmission of Mpox. Mpox is primarily transmitted through direct contact with body fluids or lesions of an infected person. That is true. Second, sexual contact is not considered a significant mode of Mpox transmission. Now, this is absolutely wrong because we read that there can be a transmission from one human being to another through this sexual mode. So, statement 2 is wrong. So, B is wrong and the C also wrong. A is the right answer. D is also wrong. Now, the Economic Survey has suggested a shift in the Reserve Bank of India's inflation target focus from headline to core inflation. Which of the following statements correctly reflect the implications and considerations related to this proposal? First, headline inflation includes volatile items such as food and energy, while core inflation excludes these volatile components to focus on the long-term trend in prices. This is absolutely true. We said that core inflation we use for developed countries, headline 1 for the developing countries. Second, since 2016, RBI has consistently met its 4% inflation target despite high food price inflation. Now, this is a wrong statement. RBI has not been able to do this that much consistently. So, statement 2 is wrong. Answer is only 1A. Fifth question, which of the following statements regarding Right to Education Act are correct? RT Act mandates free and compulsory education for all children between the age group 6 and 14 in a neighborhood school. That is absolutely true. Second, the Act requires private schools to reserve 50% of their seats for children from economically weaker section and disadvantaged groups. We said this is not 50%, this is 25%. So second statement is wrong. So you reach to the answer that is B without even reading third and fourth statement. Even we can read this. RT Act sets minimum standards for school infrastructure, pupil-teacher ratio, teacher qualification. True. The Act prohibits physical punishment, mental harassment, capitation fees, screening procedure, etc. That is true. Now moving on to the mains practice question. It says, examine the role of small satellite launch vehicles in the global space industry. How do SSLVs contribute to the democratization of space access? And what are their strategic implications for countries like India? So 3 dimensions have been asked. We'll answer all of them. First, in the introduction, because they have asked about the role, first set the context. Show them that there is a very high demand of small satellites and that's why we are looking towards SSLVs. And even in brief, you can define what is SSLV. After that, talk about the role of SSLVs, which is our first dimension. So in the role, you can say that the deployment will be very quick, the cost will be very less, and also you can say that the commercialization angle could be very much expanded over here. Then the democratization of space access, which we have already discussed in detail. This you can show, wherein you can say that any organization, maybe even any college or even any individual researcher, they can now reach out to the space directly. They can also send their satellites and this will lead to more research and development. This will lead to more innovations, which is a good thing. Then you can talk about strategic implications for countries like India. So countries like India want strategic autonomy, and for strategic autonomy, this SSLV can be very much beneficial. So you can say we can send some satellites related to defense or communication, etc. And in the conclusion, you can say that in the space sector, which is now getting commercialized and which is very important from the perspective of economy as well as national security, this can be enlarged or expanded through this SSLV. Okay, so I hope you liked the video. If you want more updates, please like, share and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Narayana IAS Academy. Thank you so much.